Welcome to the 10-minute walkthrough of how to interpret the Aristotle Plus. The Aristotle Plus is designed to help you move from complex metabolomics to a practical clinical plan without getting lost in individual biomarkers. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through a consistent, repeatable reading and an order using this sample report here. So you can go from orientation to priorities to an actionable protocol and then to a clean follow-up and retest plan. So here is the core interpretation loop. Let's start with page 1 here, okay? Let's orient and triage. And then we're going to go to page 2, which is right here. Let me see if I can fix this here. So page 2 is going to validate the sample quality, understand the projected trajectory. Page 3 is going to show you what actually is driving the lowest scoring domains. Page 4 is going to summarize the top metabolic patterns, which you can treat as your working hypotheses. Pages 5 and 6 down here, these are really designed to translate those patterns into high leverage actions and key biochemical drivers. And then pages 7 and 8 will give you the digital twin ranked intervention protocol, including predicted impact, expected deltas, and adherence effort. And then finally, the domain pages are going to help you make decisions with subdomain level specificity. And they give you really the central ratios to monitor over time. So let's start with page 1. That's going to be up here. Okay. Start with page 1 and the overall status score. In this sample report, the overall score is 51 out of 100 and falls in the early disruption zone. That single number is not meant to diagnose anything. It is meant to tell you how much metabolic strain is present across systems and how urgent in structure your first phase plan should be. Next, scan the domain scores breakdown. Your job here is not to interpret all 15 domains. Your job is to pick the 2 to 4 domains that will give you the highest leverage. In this example, the lowest scoring domains include nutrition at 42. We have liver detox at 43 and cardiovascular at 46, I believe. There we go. Glycemic control is also low at 47, close behind. Now, that immediately tells you where the clinical work starts. Now, let's look at the subdomain distribution. This is one of the most important panels to avoid overwhelming individuals in the entire report. And it tells you how many subdomains are impaired, or an early disruption, or normative, or optimized. Here in this report, we see that none are optimized, although we have a total of 124 subdomains in the Aristotle Plus. And in this individual, we have 46 are impaired, 71 are an early, with 7 being normative. So that means there is a broad burden, and you'll need to prioritize and sequence interventions. So you're not trying to fix 124 things. You are identifying the few constraints that are creating the majority of the functional limitations, and then building a protocol that is measurable and sustainable. Practical rule on page 1 is this: select your top 2 to 4 domains by lowest score, and then select one additional domain that plausibly explains maybe the patient's primary complaint or risk profile. And that kind of becomes your focus. Now, on page 2, we're going to validate the sample and set expectations. So here, if I can move to page 2 a little bit lower, the page is answering 2 questions. Do I trust this sample enough to act? And what trajectory are we aiming for? First, let's look at sample quality. In this sample report, the quality score is 81 out of 100 and is labeled as cautious. Okay, it's incomplete and to be cautious. The report flags that the sample is acceptable with minor limitations. This is where you apply guardrails. If quality is in the caution range or there are major integrity issues, you do not build an overly specific plan off small signals. You keep this interpretation conservative and you prioritize those interventions that are broadly beneficial and low risk. And then you read the context chips. In this sample, fasting is yes, coverage is 296 out of 296, and QC flags are none. Circadian timing is AM between 7 and 9, and the exertion is none in the prior 12 hours. These details matter because they reduce the chance that a short-term behavior is masquerading as a chronic pattern. If fasting was no, time of day was late, or recent exertion was high, you would interpret glycolytic stress and fuel switching signals more cautiously, for instance. Now look at the historical and projected trajectory panel. This sample report shows a projected trajectory out to 26 weeks with a projected score of 56 based on digital twin modeling. This is where you set patient expectations. You're not promising outcomes, you're setting a plausible direction and magnitude of improvement if the protocol is executed. And clinically, that helps you avoid two traps: overpromising and overcorrecting too early. Finally, let's read the key clinical insights at the bottom. These are fast, clinically phrased what matters statements. In this sample report, the key insights call out nutrition patterns consistent with micronutrient deficiency or absorption issues, liver detox limitations in phase 1 and phase 2 conjugation pathways, and cardiovascular markers suggesting attention to lipid metabolism and vascular health. Treat these as a bridge between page 1 triage and the deeper mechanistic pages. Now let's go to page 3, speaking of those pages, and let's understand what is driving the low domain score. So go to page 3, top contributors, okay? This is where Aristotle Plus is going to help you avoid the common metabolomics failure mode, which is chasing isolated outliers. The top contributors chart shows the 12 most influential metabolites driving each of the top 4 domains. And 2 rules matter here. Rule 1, these are weighted contributions, not raw concentrations. They combine deviation from a reference distribution with pathway importance and confidence weighting. So you interpret them as drivers of the score, not as standalone lab values, okay? Now, rule 2, red bars will indicate strain and green bars indicate protective or beneficial outcomes. The goal is to identify dominant drivers that are repeated across multiple domains because repeated drivers usually represent a coherent upstream constraint. Now, in this sample report, the top contributor domains are nutrition, liver, cardiovascular, and glycemic control. Now, when you see the same metabolites or related pathway markers contributing across multiple domains, that is your signal to unify the interpretation and build a cleaner hypothesis. And this is also where you decide which standard labs might be useful to corroborate risk or exclude common differentials based on the patient's history and symptom pattern. Now, let's go to page 4, where a lot of this interpretation is done, where we're converting the report into working hypotheses. This is where we present the top 5 metabolic patterns. This is your clinical reasoning map, okay? Each pattern includes a short biochemical rationale and shows which domains it's supporting. So in this sample report, the top pattern includes nutrition and micronutrient repletion, liver detoxification and conjugation capacity, cardiovascular and perfusion dynamics, glucose regulation and insulin sensitivity, and kidney filtration and renal resilience, okay? What we're going to do is use this page to form 3 outputs immediately. First, a history checklist. For example, if nutrition and repletion is top ranked, confirm dietary patterns, appetite changes, GI symptoms, restrictive diets, and supplement use. If liver detoxification capacity is flagged, confirm alcohol exposure, medication load, environmental exposures, and symptoms that are consistent with poor clearance or maybe high inflammatory burden. If glycemic control is flagged, confirm meal timing, cravings, postprandial symptoms, and sleep disruption. Second, we have a corroboration plan. So here you should already know whether you need basic labs to confirm risk, especially for cardiovascular and renal related patterns. And third, there's a priority decision to be made. Which pattern do you address first? In this sample report, nutrition and liver detox are both low scoring and upstream. So phase 1 would typically start there because nutritional cofactors and detox capacity often constrain downstream resilience. Now let's move to page 5 and 6, where we're going to take the first action steps. On page 5, we provide the top 3 priority interventions. This is the Get Started Today plan that tends to be high leverage and broadly applicable. In this sample report, the priority interventions are presented across 3 categories. They'll always be presented across these 3 categories. You'll have a diet, a top lifestyle, and a top supplemental recommendation. You here will see an omega-3 fatty acid fish intervention, a hydration sodium reduction intervention, and a methylated B complex intervention. And each includes a rationale and a target category score, which helps you understand which pillar is most limiting for this patient. Now let's go to page 6, where we see key metabolite drivers. And this page is useful for 2 reasons. First, it's going to give you a concise biochemical explanation for why the domains are scoring low. Second, it gives you a short list of markers that you can use to validate the direction of the protocol over time. And then in this sample report, you see drivers listed for nutrition, liver detox, cardiovascular, and glycemic control. The point is not to treat each metabolite directly. The point is to understand what class of dysfunction is being implied and to make sure your intervention plan actually matches that implied mechanism. Now let's go to pages 7 and 8, where we're going to be able to use a digital twin protocol right away. This is the personalized interventions section. Start at the very top. Projected improvement, okay, at retest is shown as plus 4.3 points from 51 to 56. And the report states that the top 10 protocol satisfies mandatory coverage constraints targeting key metabolic pathways. That means the protocol is not a random list. It is constructed to ensure that every flag subdomain is addressed by at least one recommendation. Now, look at the structure of each recommendation card. First, each recommendation is classified by type, such as diet, lifestyle, or supplement here, okay, as we can see on these ribbons. That matters because it helps you manage patient burden and sequencing. Second, each recommendation explicitly states the subdomain target and whether that target is impaired. This is critical. It tells you exactly what physiological shortfall the recommendation is intended to address. Third, you are given a predicted impact percentage and an expected delta over a defined time horizon, such as 6 months. Use these to prioritize interventions that are both high impact and realistic. Fourth, each recommendation includes an adherence effort estimate. This is where you operationalize the plan. Even a perfect protocol fails if adherence is unrealistic. Your job is to choose a set of interventions whose combined effort is sustainable. So the correct way to use this section is to implement the protocol in rank order while keeping the first phase manageable. Start with the top ranked diet and lifestyle actions and foundational supplement actions, then build from there. And the report has already done the hard work of connecting each action to a target and estimating expected impact. Now we're going to move to the domain pages, where we are going to confirm, specify, and measure. So once you have the top priorities and the protocol, you use the domain pages to make the plan more specific and to define what you will monitor. Each domain page is going to follow the same structure. At the top, you have the domain score and the zone. Then you have a subdomain zone distribution that tells you how many subdomains are impaired, in early disruption, normative, or optimized between 90 to 100. Then you have the subdomain list with a short explanation of what each subdomain measures and what the score itself implies. Finally, you have the central metabolite ratios and markers here at the bottom of every domain page, which are practical anchors for your monitoring. So here's how to use the domain pages efficiently. Pick one priority domain, then identify the 1 or 2 most impaired subdomains. Those are the bottlenecks most likely to constrain progress. Then look at the central ratios. If a ratio is elevated or low, treat it as a confirmatory mechanistic signal. It helps you validate whether the story is coherent and gives you a measurable target to revisit at follow-up. For example, if we look at the glycemic control domain here, domain 2, the report includes central ratios like lactate to pyruvate and glucose to beta hydroxybutyrate, which inform metabolic flexibility and mitochondrial coupling. If we go to the liver detox domain, ratios like glycine to serine and taurine to glycine help you think about conjugation capacity and amino acid partitioning. In the cardiometabolic domain, which is coming up, bear with me here. Cardio, there we go. Domain 10. Ratios at the bottom, like arginine to ADMA and citrulline to arginine, directly support interpretation of endothelial function and nitric oxide signaling. Finally, we're going to close the loop with a follow-up plan. In this sample report, the projection is shown over 26 weeks, and the projected score is 56. Let me scroll up to that. There we go. Your job is going to be to align the patient to the protocol, implement it with realistic adherence expectations, and then retest at the time window the report is projecting against so you can assess change cleanly. And then at follow-up, you'll do three things: confirm adherence and context, review symptom or outcome changes, then compare domain and subdomain movement to the intended targets of the interventions. The goal isn't going to be perfection. The goal is going to be measurable movement in the intended direction with a protocol that the patient can actually sustain. So that is the Aristotle Plus interpretation loop. We orient on page 1. We validate the sample and expectations on page 2. We understand the drivers on page 3. We form hypotheses on page 4 and act on pages 5 and 6. Apply the digital twin protocol on pages 7 and 8, and use the domain pages to confirm, specify, and measure. Thank you very much.